Charleston, South Carolina, 1848, a city built on the backs of enslaved people, where cotton flows like rivers and human suffering is measured only in profit margins. But in a modest clinic on Meeting Street, one man is attempting something revolutionary, something that will challenge everything the medical world believes about pain, consciousness, and the very limits of human endurance. His name is Dr. Edmund Hartwell, and he has no idea that his obsession with understanding pain will lead him down a path from which there is no return. The morning air is thick with humidity as Edmund stands in his laboratory, a converted carriage house behind his three-story townhouse. Sunlight filters through tall windows, illuminating rows of glass instruments, leather-bound journals, and peculiar devices of his own invention. At 34 years old, Edmund has already earned a reputation as one of Charleston's most skilled surgeons, yet his peers whisper about his unorthodox methods and his disturbing fascination with the mechanics of human suffering. Edmund's hands move with precision as he adjusts a brass instrument he calls the algometer, a device designed to measure pain responses in patients. The contraption consists of a spring-loaded needle attached to a calibrated dial, allowing him to apply controlled pressure to specific points on the body while recording the subject's reactions. It is crude by any standard, but it represents something no one else in the medical community has attempted: the quantification of agony itself. His wife, Catherine, appears in the doorway carrying a tray with coffee and toast. She is 28, with dark hair pulled back in a simple bun, and eyes that once sparkled with admiration for her husband's brilliance. Now those eyes carry concern, perhaps even fear. She watches as Edmund makes notes in his journal, his handwriting small and meticulous, filling page after page with observations about nerve responses and threshold measurements. Catherine sets the tray on a side table. Edmund does not acknowledge her presence. She has grown accustomed to this, his complete absorption in his work, the way the rest of the world simply ceases to exist when he is conducting his research. But lately something has shifted. His experiments have become more intense, more personal. He no longer simply observes pain in others. He has begun testing his own tolerance, using himself as a subject. Last week she found him in the laboratory at 3 in the morning, his left hand immersed in a bucket of ice water, timing how long he could endure the burning cold. The week before, she discovered burns on his forearms, deliberate measured burns arranged in a grid pattern, each one carefully documented in his journals. When she confronted him, Edmund explained with unsettling calm that subjective reports from patients were unreliable. The only way to truly understand pain was to experience it firsthand, to map it with scientific precision. Edmund finally looks up from his work, noticing Catherine for the first time. He offers a thin smile, but it does not reach his eyes. Those grey eyes, once warm and full of curiosity about the world, now hold something darker, an intensity that frightens her. He tells her about his latest hypothesis, that pain is not merely a warning system, but a language, a complex code the body uses to communicate with the conscious mind. If he can decipher that code, he believes he can revolutionize medicine, perhaps even find ways to eliminate suffering entirely. Catherine listens, wanting to believe in his noble intentions. But she cannot shake the feeling that Edmund is chasing something beyond scientific understanding, that his obsession has transformed from academic curiosity into something far more dangerous. She asks him to come inside for breakfast, to take a rest, to remember that he has responsibilities beyond his research. They have a daughter, Margaret, who is only 6 years old and barely sees her father anymore. Edmund promises he will join them shortly, but Catherine knows better. She leaves the coffee and toast, knowing they will sit untouched until evening. As she walks back toward the main house, she glances over her shoulder and sees Edmund already bent over his instruments again, lost in his private world of measurement and pain. The morning sun climbs higher, casting long shadows across the laboratory floor, and somewhere in the distance, church bells ring, marking another hour in a city that thinks it understands suffering but has no idea what is brewing in the mind of Dr. Edmund Hartwell. 3 months pass and Edmund's research intensifies with each day. His reputation in Charleston's medical community begins to fracture. Dr. William Prescott, the city's most respected physician and Edmund's former mentor, visits the clinic on Meeting Street with growing concern. Prescott is 62, silver-haired, with the bearing of a man who has seen every manner of human ailment and considers himself beyond surprise. Yet what he witnesses in Edmund's laboratory that afternoon shakes even his seasoned composure. Edmund demonstrates his latest device, a more sophisticated version of the algometer that can now measure multiple pain points simultaneously. He has volunteers, mostly poor immigrants and freed blacks who need the money Edmund offers for their participation. Prescott watches as Edmund methodically applies pressure to a young Irish woman's fingers, recording her reactions with clinical detachment. The woman grimaces, tears forming in her eyes, but Edmund shows no emotion. He simply notes the readings and adjusts his calculations. After the subject leaves, Prescott confronts his former student. He speaks carefully, choosing his words with the precision of a surgeon's knife. He acknowledges Edmund's brilliance, his contributions to surgical technique, his innovative approach to anesthesia. But this current path, Prescott warns, leads nowhere good. The medical establishment will not accept research built on the systematic infliction of pain. More importantly, Prescott sees something troubling in Edmund's demeanor, a disconnection from the human element that should guide every physician's hand. Edmund listens with barely concealed impatience. He argues that progress requires sacrifice, that comfort and convention have held medicine back for centuries. The ancients believed in the four humors. Modern doctors still apply leeches and perform bloodletting, based on superstition rather than evidence. His work, Edmund insists, is grounded in observable, measurable reality. Pain is not a moral question, but a physiological one. Understanding its mechanisms could save countless lives, prevent unnecessary suffering in surgical theaters across the world. Prescott remains unconvinced. He mentions the rumors circulating among Charleston's elite, whispers about Edmund's late-night experiments, about screams heard coming from his laboratory, about his wife's increasingly haggard appearance. These rumors, true or not, are damaging Edmund's practice. Wealthy patients are taking their business elsewhere, unwilling to trust a doctor they perceive as unstable or cruel. Prescott urges Edmund to step back, to focus on conventional practice for a while, to let this obsession cool before it destroys everything he has built. The conversation ends poorly. Edmund thanks Prescott for his concern, but makes clear he will not abandon his research. After Prescott leaves, Edmund sits alone in his laboratory, staring at his journals. He knows the older doctor means well, but Prescott is a relic of an outdated era, bound by sentiment and tradition. Edmund sees himself as something different, a pioneer willing to venture into uncomfortable territory, because that is where true knowledge lives. That evening, Catherine finds Edmund in his study rather than the laboratory. A rare occurrence. She hopes this means Prescott's visit had an impact, that perhaps her husband is reconsidering his path. She sits across from him, and for a moment they exist in comfortable silence like they did during their courtship years ago. Edmund was different then, passionate about medicine, yes, but also present in their life together, engaged with the world beyond his research. Catherine gathers her courage and speaks. She tells Edmund that Margaret asked why Papa does not read to her anymore, why he never joins them for Sunday services, why he sometimes looks at them as if he does not quite recognize them. Catherine's voice cracks slightly as she confesses her own fear, not just that Edmund is damaging his career, but that he is losing himself, becoming someone she no longer knows. Edmund's response is measured, almost gentle. He explains that great work requires great sacrifice, that the men who change the world are rarely understood by their contemporaries. He loves Catherine and Margaret more than anything, he says, but this research is his life's purpose. Once he completes his work, once he proves his theories, everything will return to normal. He just needs more time, more data, more understanding. Catherine wants to believe him, desperately wants to recapture what they once had. But as she looks into his eyes that evening, she sees only the reflection of her own worried face, and behind it, something hollow and unreachable. She nods, says nothing more, and retreats to their bedroom alone. Edmund returns to his journals, making notes by candlelight until dawn breaks over Charleston's rooftops, beginning another day in his relentless pursuit of understanding. By late autumn, Edmund's financial situation has deteriorated significantly. The wealthy families who once filled his appointment book have vanished, replaced by desperate cases, industrial accidents, knife wounds from tavern fights, illnesses among the poor who have nowhere else to turn. Edmund treats them competently, but his mind is always elsewhere, calculating, measuring, observing. He sees every patient not as a person, but as a data point, another opportunity to refine his understanding of pain's architecture. His laboratory has expanded to fill nearly the entire carriage house. New instruments line the walls, some purchased from medical supply companies in Boston and Philadelphia, others fabricated by local craftsmen according to Edmund's exacting specifications. There are devices for measuring reaction time, instruments for applying heat and cold with precision, mechanisms for creating controlled injuries to study healing processes. The algometer has evolved into something far more complex, now capable of generating detailed maps of nerve sensitivity across the entire human body. Edmund's journals have multiplied as well. Dozens of leather-bound volumes fill shelves, each one crammed with observations, diagrams, and theoretical frameworks. He has developed his own notation system for categorizing different types of pain: sharp versus dull, superficial versus deep, constant versus intermittent. He has created elaborate charts showing how pain thresholds vary based on age, sex, health status, and previous exposure to suffering. It is pioneering work, genuinely innovative, but there is no one to share it with. The medical journals refuse to publish his papers, and his colleagues avoid him at society gatherings. Catherine's inheritance has kept them afloat financially, but those resources are nearly exhausted. She has sold her mother's jewelry, mortgaged the townhouse, dismissed their household staff except for an elderly cook. Margaret's governess left 3 months ago, and the girl now spends her days largely unsupervised, wandering the house like a ghost. Catherine tries to maintain some semblance of normal family life, but the effort exhausts her. She looks older than her years, her face drawn, her hands perpetually trembling from anxiety and lack of sleep. One night in November, Edmund comes to dinner looking particularly animated. Catherine's heart lifts momentarily. Perhaps he has good news. Perhaps he has secured a wealthy patient or received recognition for his work. But as Edmund speaks, her hope dissolves into horror. He has made a breakthrough, he announces. His research has reached a critical threshold, but to proceed further, he needs to push beyond conventional limitations. The experiments with volunteers have provided valuable data, but subjective reports remain problematic. Different people describe pain differently, making precise comparison impossible. The solution, Edmund explains with eerie calm, is to eliminate that variable. He must use a single subject for all future experiments, someone whose responses he can track over time, creating a comprehensive baseline against which to measure everything. And that subject, he has decided, must be himself. No one else possesses the scientific training to accurately observe and document their own pain responses. No one else is committed enough to endure what must be endured for the sake of knowledge. Catherine stares at him in disbelief. She asks what exactly he intends to do, though she already fears the answer. Edmund outlines his plan methodically, as if describing a routine surgical procedure. He will subject himself to a series of carefully controlled injuries and insults: burns, cuts, breaks, exposure to extreme temperatures. Each will be measured, documented, and analyzed. He will push his body to its limits and beyond, mapping the boundaries of human tolerance with himself as the laboratory. Margaret sits at the table, not understanding the conversation, but sensing her mother's distress. The little girl's face is pale, her eyes too large in her thin face. She has grown quiet over these months, rarely speaking, spending hours alone in her room with her dolls. Catherine reaches for her daughter's hand under the table, squeezing it gently, as if that small gesture can protect the child from the madness unfolding around them. Catherine begs Edmund to reconsider. She asks him to think about their daughter, about their future, about his own survival. What he proposes is not research, but self-destruction. No medical board will ever accept findings derived from such methods. He will accomplish nothing except his own ruin. But Edmund meets her pleas with the cold logic that has come to define him. Great discoveries, he reminds her, always require sacrifice. The men who pioneered vaccination infected themselves with diseases. Chemists have poisoned themselves to understand toxic substances. This is no different, merely another frontier in the long history of scientific martyrdom. The conversation ends there. Edmund returns to his laboratory, leaving Catherine and Margaret alone in the dining room with their untouched food growing cold on fine china plates. Catherine knows in that moment that she has lost him. The man she married, kind, ambitious, full of wonder at the world's mysteries, has been consumed by something darker. What remains is a hollow shell, animated only by obsession, incapable of recognizing the damage he is inflicting on everyone around him. That night, Catherine lies awake in their bed, listening to sounds from the carriage house, metal scraping metal, glass clinking, and once a sharp cry quickly stifled. She pulls the pillow over her head, trying to block it out, but sleep does not come. Dawn finds her staring at the ceiling, tears dried on her cheeks, wondering how much longer this nightmare can continue. December arrives with unusual cold for Charleston. Frost covers the gardens, and the harbour shows thin sheets of ice along its edges. Inside Edmund's laboratory, the temperature is carefully controlled. He has installed a small stove to maintain consistent conditions for his experiments. What happens over the next 4 weeks will become legend in medical circles, though the full truth will remain hidden in journals that no one else will ever read. Edmund begins methodically. He starts with his left hand, the non-dominant one, preserving his right for documentation purposes. Using a scalpel from his surgical kit, he makes shallow incisions across his palm, each one precisely measured, 5 millimeters deep, 10 millimeters long, spaced exactly 15 millimeters apart. He records the pain intensity on his own scale, noting how it changes as the blade penetrates different layers of tissue. Skin produces a sharp, bright pain. Subcutaneous fat creates a duller, more diffuse sensation. When the blade touches fascia, the pain takes on a deep, aching quality that radiates up his forearm. He photographs his hand at regular intervals using the daguerreotype equipment he purchased specifically for this purpose. The images are stark and clinical, damaged flesh rendered in shades of grey and black, wounds carefully labelled with numbers corresponding to his journal entries. He applies various substances to different cuts, alcohol, salt water, turpentine, documenting how each one alters the pain experience. Some wounds he leaves open to study infection, others he sutures closed to compare healing rates. The burns come next. Edmund has constructed a device that delivers controlled heat through metal probes. He applies these to his forearm, creating a grid of first, second, and third-degree burns. The pain from third-degree burns surprises him. Contrary to popular belief, they hurt less initially than second-degree burns because they destroy the nerve endings, but the subsequent pain, as the body begins to heal, proves far more intense and prolonged. He documents everything, his handwriting growing shakier as the damage accumulates, but never stopping, never faltering in his commitment to complete observation. By mid-December, Edmund has moved on to bones. Using a small surgical mallet, he deliberately fractures his left ring finger, documenting the unique quality of bone pain, deep, nauseating, accompanied by a sickening sensation that no surface injury can replicate. He splints the finger himself and continues working, incorporating the healing process into his ongoing study. Every twinge, every throb, every moment of agony becomes data, transformed from subjective experience into objective measurement. Catherine knows something is happening in the laboratory, but cannot bring herself to look. She sees Edmund at meals when he occasionally remembers to eat. His left arm is bandaged from wrist to elbow, and he moves with a careful stiffness that speaks of constant pain. His face has grown gaunt, his skin waxy and pale. Dark circles beneath his eyes suggest he sleeps little, if at all. Yet his eyes themselves burn with feverish intensity, lit by something beyond mere physical discomfort, a kind of terrible exhilaration, as if he has glimpsed something profound in his suffering. Dr. Prescott visits again, summoned by Catherine in desperation. Edmund refuses to see him. Prescott stands outside the laboratory door, calling to his former student, trying to reason with him through the locked entrance. Edmund's voice comes from within, calm and measured. explaining that he cannot be disturbed during critical phases of the research. Prescott threatens to involve the authorities to have Edmund committed to an asylum. Edmund laughs, a sound without humor, and reminds Prescott that he is conducting experiments on himself, harming no one else. What law could possibly prohibit that? After Prescott leaves, Catherine makes her decision. She cannot save Edmund, but she can save their daughter. She packs 2 trunks with their clothes and Margaret's few toys, withdraws the last of their money from the bank, and arranges passage on a steamer to Baltimore where her sister lives. She writes Edmund a letter, though she doubts he will read it. She tells him she loves the man he was, but cannot watch him destroy himself. She hopes someday he will remember he has a family and find his way back to them. But until then, she and Margaret must leave. They depart on a grey December morning, while Edmund is absorbed in his laboratory. Catherine does not say goodbye. She fears if she sees him, her resolve will crumble. Margaret asks about Papa as their carriage rolls toward the docks. Catherine tells her daughter that Papa is sick, and they are going to visit Aunt Elizabeth for a while. The little girl accepts this explanation without question. She has learned not to ask too many questions about her father's strange behavior. Edmund discovers their absence that evening. He finds Catherine's letter on the dining room table, reads it once, folds it carefully and places it in his coat pocket. He feels something, a distant ache that is not physical, a sense of loss hovering at the edge of his consciousness. But the sensation is muted, filtered through layers of exhaustion and pain and single-minded focus. He knows he should feel more, knows this should devastate him. But the knowing and the feeling are separated by an unbridgeable gulf. He returns to his laboratory. The work continues. There is still so much to document, so much to understand. His left hand is nearly useless now, the fingers too damaged for fine motor control. He has begun designing a device that will let him conduct experiments on his right hand while still maintaining his ability to write. The solution is elegant in its simplicity, a modified version of his algometer that operates via foot pedals, leaving both hands free for documentation until the very moment of injury. Christmas passes unmarked in the laboratory. The city celebrates around him, but Edmund exists outside of time now, living in the eternal present defined entirely by sensation and measurement. January 1849 brings no relief from the cold. Edmund's townhouse stands dark and silent, except for the carriage house, where lamplight burns through every night. The few servants Catherine employed before leaving have not returned, and Edmund makes no effort to hire replacements. He eats sparingly, bread, cheese, whatever requires no preparation, and sleeps in brief intervals on a cot in the laboratory, unwilling to waste time returning to the empty house. His body has become a living map of trauma. Both hands are damaged now, the fingers crooked and scarred, several of them broken and improperly healed. His forearms bear systematic patterns of burns and cuts in various stages of healing. He has shaved his head to conduct experiments on scalp sensitivity, leaving a patchwork of deliberately inflicted wounds across his skull. His weight has dropped dramatically. His clothes hang loose on a frame that was never heavy to begin with. Yet his mind remains sharp, perhaps sharper than ever. The pain has become a kind of companion, a constant presence that paradoxically focuses his thoughts. He has developed theories about pain's relationship to consciousness, documenting how extreme physical suffering can alter perception, create dissociative states, even generate something approaching euphoria when the body's natural opioids flood the system in response to overwhelming trauma. Edmund has moved beyond simple measurement into exploration of pain's transformative properties. He experiments with duration, maintaining constant low-level pain for days at a time to study how the nervous system adapts. He varies intensity, applying sudden severe trauma after periods of relief to document the shock effect. He combines different pain types, burning and crushing simultaneously, chemical and thermal, sharp and dull, creating complex sensory experiences that have never been formally studied. His journals have become increasingly difficult to read. The handwriting wavers and sometimes breaks into incomprehensible scrawls when the pain overwhelms his ability to write clearly. But he persists, creating a record that is both scientifically precise and profoundly disturbing. He sketches his damaged body with clinical accuracy, labels every wound, tracks every symptom. The pages are stained with blood, sweat, and occasionally tears, though Edmund would insist those are merely physiological responses to extreme stimulation, nothing more. Dr. Prescott makes one final attempt to intervene. He arrives with 2 colleagues and the city marshal, prepared to forcibly remove Edmund from the premises if necessary. They find the laboratory door unlocked. Inside, the scene that greets them will haunt their nightmares for years. Edmund sits at his workbench, his ruined hands somehow still holding a pen, writing in a journal. The stench of infected wounds fills the air. Medical instruments lie scattered across blood-stained surfaces. Edmund looks up at his visitors with eyes that seem to peer from an impossible distance. He greets Prescott politely, asks about his health, inquires whether the older doctor has given any thought to his theories about pain quantification. Prescott, struggling to maintain his composure, tells Edmund this has gone far enough. He needs medical attention, proper rest, perhaps confinement in a sanitarium, where he can recover under supervision. Edmund considers this calmly, then declines. His work is approaching completion, he explains. Just a few more experiments, a few more data points, and he will have mapped the entire landscape of human pain. To stop now would render all his suffering meaningless. The marshal steps forward, insisting Edmund must come with them. But Edmund raises one mangled hand in a gesture that somehow conveys absolute authority despite its physical ruin. He tells them they have no legal grounds to remove him. He is harming only himself, conducting private research on his own property. The standoff ends when Edmund offers a compromise. He will allow Prescott to examine him, will accept treatment for any life-threatening infections, but he will not leave his laboratory and will not cease his work. Prescott reluctantly agrees, knowing it is the best he can achieve. He cleans and bandages the worst wounds, while Edmund continues explaining his latest findings, his voice steady even as Prescott probes infected tissue. The other doctors wait outside, unable to stomach the scene. February marks a subtle shift in Edmund's research. Having exhausted the possibilities of external trauma, he begins exploring internal pain. He has read accounts of kidney stones, gallbladder attacks, appendicitis, conditions that generate agony from within, inaccessible to measurement by his existing instruments. He becomes fascinated by visceral pain, that deep, poorly localized suffering that seems to emanate from the body's core. Edmund develops a methodical approach. He begins by ingesting various substances known to cause gastrointestinal distress: spoiled food, contaminated water, chemical irritants diluted to sublethal doses. He documents the cramping, the nausea, the waves of pain that build and recede like tides. He notes how visceral pain differs fundamentally from somatic pain, harder to pinpoint, accompanied by autonomic responses like sweating and changes in heart rate, often radiating in unexpected patterns. The experiments grow more extreme. Edmund has obtained cadavers through questionable channels, unclaimed bodies from the city morgue, purchased with the last of his money. He dissects them methodically, studying internal anatomy to identify specific organs and structures. Then, in a development that crosses into territory even his damaged mind recognizes as dangerous, he begins using surgical techniques on himself. He starts with minor procedures, inserting needles into his abdomen to stimulate different areas, using his knowledge of anatomy to target specific organs. He performs these experiments with only alcohol as anesthetic, needing to remain conscious to document his sensations. The pain is extraordinary, unlike anything his external experiments produced. When a needle touches his peritoneum, the thin membrane lining the abdominal cavity, the agony is so intense he temporarily loses vision, the world whiting out before slowly returning. Edmund's documentation becomes increasingly fragmented. Whole pages of his journals consist of single words repeated: burning, written dozens of times, or deep, scrawled in increasingly shaky handwriting. Some entries are merely sketches, abstract representations of pain's quality, geometric patterns that somehow convey what words cannot. He is pushing into territory beyond language, beyond normal human experience. His physical deterioration accelerates. The internal experiments carry risks far beyond surface wounds. Infection is almost certain, sepsis a constant threat. Edmund develops fevers that leave him delirious for hours, during which he continues writing, filling pages with observations that make no sense when he reviews them later. His body begins failing in predictable ways. His kidneys struggle, his liver shows signs of damage, his digestive system rebels against the abuse. Yet something remarkable emerges from the madness. Edmund's theories, refined through unimaginable suffering, begin to approach actual insight. He has identified patterns in how the nervous system processes different pain types, discovered relationships between physical trauma and psychological state, documented adaptive mechanisms that allow the body to tolerate increasing levels of damage. In another time, under different circumstances, his work might have contributed genuinely to medical understanding. But there is no one to share it with. His isolation is complete. The few people who knew him avoid his property. Rumors circulate through Charleston about the mad doctor who tortures himself in the name of science. Parents use him as a cautionary tale for children. Study too hard, become too obsessed, and you might end up like Dr. Hartwell. The medical community writes him off as a tragic case, a brilliant mind destroyed by obsession. Edmund no longer cares about recognition. The work has become its own purpose, existing in a closed loop that requires no external validation. He is both scientist and subject, observer and observed, creating a singular record of human suffering that will never be published, never be read, never contribute to anything beyond his own terrible understanding. March arrives cold and wet, and Edmund barely notices the changing season. By late March, Edmund has reached the limits of what his body can endure. Infection has spread throughout his system. He suffers from constant fever, his skin taking on a yellowish cast as his liver fails. His hands, damaged beyond repair, can barely hold a pen. Yet he continues, driven by something beyond reason, beyond survival instinct, beyond anything resembling normal human motivation. He has begun experiencing phenomena he cannot fully explain. During moments of extreme pain, his consciousness seems to fragment, creating states where he simultaneously feels agony and observes it from a distance. He documents these dissociative episodes with clinical precision, even as he recognizes they represent his mind's attempt to escape unbearable reality. The boundary between observer and observed has collapsed entirely. He is the experiment, and the experiment is him. Edmund's final entries grow increasingly philosophical. He writes about pain as a fundamental aspect of existence, as essential to human experience as joy or love or any positive emotion. He theorizes that consciousness itself might be rooted in the body's ability to suffer, that self-awareness emerges from the nervous system's sophisticated pain-processing capabilities. These ideas are profound, possibly even accurate, but they arrive wrapped in the ravings of a dying man. On March 28th, Edmund makes his last journal entry. His handwriting is nearly illegible, the words wandering across the page in irregular patterns. He describes a sensation he calls complete pain, a state where suffering has become so total, so overwhelming, that it transcends individual stimuli and becomes something else entirely. He writes that he has achieved his goal, has mapped the entire territory of human agony, has pushed beyond the boundaries that limit ordinary experience. The entry ends mid-sentence. The pen has fallen from his ruined fingers, leaving a trail of ink across the page like a final signature. Edmund sits at his workbench, too weak to move, staring at instruments he can no longer operate. His laboratory, once pristine and organized, has become a chamber of horrors. Blood-stained surfaces, rust-covered instruments, journals stacked in chaotic piles. He thinks about Catherine and Margaret, though their faces have become indistinct in his memory, like daguerreotypes left too long in sunlight. He feels something that might be regret, but the emotion is distant, filtered through layers of pain and exhaustion. He wonders if his work will survive him, if someday another researcher might find his journals and recognize their value. But even that hope is faint, barely registered against the overwhelming reality of his physical collapse. Edmund's last coherent thought is about measurement. He has spent months quantifying pain, reducing human suffering to numbers and graphs and calibrated scales. But now, at the end, he realizes pain's true nature resists quantification. It is subjective, personal, irreducible to any external metric. His entire project was doomed from the start. You cannot measure agony from outside because pain exists only in the experiencing of it. This recognition arrives too late to change anything. Night falls on the laboratory. Edmund remains at his workbench, his breathing shallow and irregular. Fever dreams blend with consciousness, creating hallucinations where his instruments speak to him in Catherine's voice, where his journals bloom into flowers made of damaged tissue. He is dying, though the process will take several more days. His body, remarkably, continues fighting, trying to heal despite impossible odds. On April 1st, a neighbor notices the smell coming from the Hartwell property. The city marshal is summoned, along with Dr. Prescott. They find Edmund collapsed across his workbench, still breathing but unresponsive. His laboratory is exactly as feared, a testament to systematic self-destruction, walls covered with charts mapping the geography of suffering, instruments designed for the infliction of measured agony. They carry him to the main house, lay him in the bed he shared with Catherine. Prescott does what he can, which is essentially nothing. The damage is too extensive, the infection too advanced. Edmund drifts in and out of consciousness for 3 more days. Edmund dies on April 4th, 1849, without regaining lucid consciousness. Dr. Prescott, maintaining his vigil despite everything, records the time as 3:47 in the morning. There are no last words, no deathbed revelations, no final recognition of what has been lost. Edmund simply stops breathing, his damaged body finally surrendering to injuries no human frame could indefinitely endure. Prescott faces the question of what to do with Edmund's research. The journals fill 3 large trunks, years of observations, theories, diagrams, and measurements. They represent both genuine scientific inquiry and profound moral failure, innovation and horror inextricably mixed. After days of deliberation, Prescott makes his decision. He will preserve the journals, but ensure they remain hidden, stored in a locked vault where they cannot influence other vulnerable minds. The official story, the one that appears in Charleston's newspapers, describes Dr. Edmund Hartwell as a promising physician who succumbed to mental illness. His self-experimentation is mentioned only vaguely, framed as unfortunate excess rather than systematic self-destruction. The medical community closes ranks, protecting one of their own even in death, unwilling to acknowledge how completely one of them crossed every ethical boundary. Catherine receives word of Edmund's death via telegram in Baltimore. She feels grief, but it is complicated by relief and residual anger. The man she mourned has been gone for months. His physical death merely makes official what she already accepted. She decides not to return to Charleston for the funeral, unable to face the memories that city contains. Margaret, now 7 years old, barely remembers her father. She will grow up knowing him only through carefully curated stories that omit the darkness. Edmund's estate is insolvent. The townhouse must be sold to satisfy debts. His laboratory equipment is auctioned off, purchased by other doctors who never learn the purposes to which it was put. The carriage house is cleaned, repainted, converted into ordinary storage. Within months, no physical trace remains of what happened there, though neighbors will whisper for years about screams heard in the night. Prescott keeps his promise regarding the journals. They sit in his personal vault, untouched and unread. When Prescott dies in 1867, his executor discovers them, but, reading only the first few pages, understands why they were hidden. They are transferred to the Medical University of South Carolina, catalogued but restricted, available only to senior researchers with specific permission. Over decades, that permission is requested perhaps a dozen times, usually by historians studying 19th century medical practice. The journal's significance is never fully recognized. They remain a curiosity, the disturbing legacy of an unstable mind rather than serious scientific work. Edmund's theories about pain, some of which anticipated developments in neurology by decades, are dismissed as the ravings of a madman. His systematic documentation, which could have contributed to understanding of nervous system function, is considered too tainted by its methods to have value. Yet Edmund's story persists in medical folklore. Students hear whispered versions during late-night study sessions, the doctor who measured pain until it destroyed him, the researcher who made himself the ultimate experiment. The details vary with each telling, becoming more lurid and less accurate, until the real Edmund Hartwell disappears beneath layers of myth. The truth, preserved in those locked journals, is both simpler and more terrible than legend suggests. Edmund was not a monster or a madman in the conventional sense. He was a brilliant man who asked a profound question: how can we truly understand suffering, but lacked the wisdom to recognize that some knowledge comes at too high a price. His tragedy was not his ambition, but his belief that everything, even agony, could be reduced to measurement and analysis. In the end, Edmund proved only that pain cannot be quantified from outside, that suffering remains stubbornly subjective, resistant to all attempts at objective mapping. He destroyed himself, chasing an answer that his very methodology made impossible to achieve. His final legacy is not scientific advancement, but a cautionary tale about obsession's price, about the difference between knowledge and wisdom, about the necessity of maintaining our humanity even in pursuit of truth. Charleston moves on. The Civil War arrives, bringing suffering on a scale that makes one doctor's self-destruction seem almost quaint. The city burns, rebuilds, transforms. Edmund's story fades, remembered only by those who study medical history's darker corners. But somewhere, locked away in a university vault, his journals wait, a record of one man's journey into pain's heart, and the terrible price he paid for that knowledge. Every family hides secrets, some so dark they should never see the light of day. Here, we open the doors to those shadowed pasts, uncovering hidden crimes, silent pacts, and stories that echo like ghosts through the halls of memory. If you've made it this far, it means you also carry that forbidden curiosity. So don't hesitate. Subscribe to the channel now, turn on the bell, and follow our next revelations. Because every day, new secrets emerge, and only those who dare to face the truth remain to hear them.